Well, families around the country will do their best this Sunday to give Dad a special day. And that's exactly what Sonora Smart Dodd did for her father. She was the determined daughter of a Civil War veteran, and for 60 years she fought for a day to honor him and all fathers everywhere.
The greatest gift I ever had came from God. I call him Dad. In those few words, the unknown author captured a truth poets, writers, philosophers, and preachers have been writing about for centuries. Good fathers are indispensable in life and deeply missed when they're gone. In the words of Billy Graham, a good father is one of the most unsung, unpraised, unnoticed, and yet one of the most valuable assets in our society. It's likely those very thoughts inspired Sonora Smart Dodd, the young woman who imagined a National Father's Day in honor of her father, William Jackson Smart. A Civil War veteran and father of 12, William suffered personal pain and loss, yet still managed to show Sonora and her siblings the meaning of unconditional, sacrificial love, expecting nothing in return. An 83-year-old Sonora said in a 1965 interview,
"My own father never accepted Father's Day as personal to himself, but to all fathers, worthy fathers."
Today, Betsy Roddy passes down their story. She's Sonora's great-granddaughter and William Smart's great-great-granddaughter, and says much of what she knows she heard from Sonora herself.
I think she viewed him as a dedicated father. The very fact that he went against the norm would have been upon his wife's passing, that the young children would have been farmed out to relatives to raise. He didn't do that, never considered doing it. He was clearly dedicated to family. It simply wasn't a requirement in those days, in that era, for widowers to take on the role that he did, but he did.
William's story as a father begins when he took up farming after serving in the Union Army in the Civil War. At war's end in Arkansas, the now 22-year-old Union artillery sergeant married Elizabeth and had 3 children. 13 years later, his wife died, leaving him to raise his children alone. He went on to marry Ellen, a widow with 3 children of her own. Their first child together was Sonora, followed by 5 boys. Now, there were 12.
In fact, they all got along and they called themselves steps, halves, and sibs. It was the joke in the family.
Later, they all moved westward to a soldier's homestead in eastern Washington. But in 1898, 18 years after they married, Ellen died in childbirth. With his 6 youngest children, Sonora and her 5 brothers still home, he again put his own pain aside to be there for them.
She recalls a story on the night of her mother's funeral that her youngest brother ran out into the night kind of crying and looking for his mom. And her father followed him out there, brought him in, sat by the fire, and rocked him to sleep and sang to him. And as she recounts, in that moment, her father became father and mother to their entire, very large family.
That sense of strength, caring, and protection would carry Sonora's family through many good and bad times for years to come. Then in 1909, Sonora, now a 27-year-old wife and mother living in Spokane, Washington, attended to a Mother's Day service that actually brought her father to mind.
She went and talked to her minister afterwards and said, "I love what you said about mothers and Mother's Day. But what about fathers? When do they get their time in the sun?"
After careful consideration and thought, Sonora called on churches to establish a National Father's Day. Within a year, she had convinced church and government leaders, including the Washington state governor, to set aside every 3rd Sunday of June to celebrate fathers. On June 19, 1910, Presbyterian and Methodist churches throughout Washington observed the first Father's Day. Sonora, of course, went to church that morning, and afterwards, she spent her day delivering Father's Day gifts to elderly shut-ins. By the following year, Father's Day was being observed around the world, and Sonora would have 9 more years to celebrate with her father before his death in 1919. Still, it wasn't until 1966, when Sonora was 84, that President Lyndon Johnson issued an executive order designating the 3rd Sunday in June as Father's Day. 6 years later, in 1972, it would be signed into law by Richard Nixon, calling on U.S. citizens to offer public and private expressions of such day, the abiding love and gratitude which they bear for their fathers. Shortly after, on her 90th birthday, Sonora received a telegram from President Nixon, thanking her for this great tradition, a day we remember the undeniable need for good fathers in our families, communities, and societies.
It was extremely gratifying to her. Imagine, she's been working on this since 1910. So 62 years later, it becomes real in a very codified sense of the word. And because I think it signaled the level of importance that she always had for this legacy, and not just because of her own father, but for fathers everywhere. She was really dedicated to the idea of, we need to celebrate them. They do a really amazing thing.
Moms and dads make the world go round. Fathers, we need you. Your presence is crucial for our culture and our society and the lives of your children and family. And Gordon, you are a dad of 3.
I am.
Okay, so I wanted to ask you, what is the
I'm
greatest?
a grandfather now, too.
Yeah, you're a grandfather.
Of
Yay,
2.
love that. What has been the greatest or biggest lesson that you've learned being a dad and now grandfather too?
What I learned when I became a father, and you read the scripture about, our Father, the Father's heart, all of these things, and until you experience that, you really don't know. I learned more about God by being a father, because in my life for the first time, there's a child, and I go, yes, I would give my life. I would give everything. Yeah. I want so much for this person. Yeah. Who is a part of me, an extension of me. I want them to have everything. I want them to grow up and just be strong. So it really opened up for me a link to what is God feeling about us. And now that concept was not some kind of foreign thing, or I had to be convinced God really does love you and all. It became so real that yes, this is how God looks at us.
That's beautiful. I love that. And happy Father's Day.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And Grandfather's Day.
Yes.